In other news we're following today, with the threat of new U.S. tariffs looming, the Ford government has launched an ad campaign south of the border, pushing Ontario as an ally to the north. The minute-long video was posted on social media by the Premier this week and is getting mixed reaction, as is the Premier's appearances on some major U.S. networks. CTV political commentator Scott Reid joins me now with more on this. Scott, good to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Lindsay. Good to see you.
I don't know where to start. There's just so much to go over here. We're kind of just going to look at the last week and just kind of break it down. So I guess we'll start with those ads that Ontario has released. What do you make of them? I saw a lot of bridges, a lot of open water. What do you think?
A bunch of things. First of all, let's give the government as due credit, the government of Ontario and Premier Ford. And their argument is, look, we have no choice but to do this. The interests at stake are too vital. They feel that the federal government has been slow-footed, and they're filling the vacuum by going down, doing these ads, making these media appearances, and structuring this appeal. I have to be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of it. I mean, this does not smack of Team Canada. It seems team chaotic. Are these ads actually oriented toward U.S. decision makers? Because they feel a lot more like they've been built for Ontario voters, from my perspective. And I just think we have to work strategically, not tactically, and say, what can we do collectively? Not just one province, but the whole government of Canada, provincial governments, business, labor. What's the right response? How do we either get around these tariffs, or how do we manage through these tariffs? And I just don't think that one jurisdiction is going to make a lot of progress by running off willy-nilly on its own.
Is that kind of your same feelings then when we're talking about Premier Doug Ford making a couple of appearances on Fox News, CNN, talking about the tariff threat and why, you know, Canada shouldn't have tariffs imposed on it? Is that your same feeling, that it's more geared towards Ontarians? Like, how is this going to impact Americans, really, with him making these appearances?
I think it's all of a piece. I think the ads, I think the appearances in media, I think all of it feels to me like it's more oriented toward domestic audiences. We know that Premier Ford's playing with the idea of an early election. And, you know, much of it is built around domestic messages like, oh, well, you know, Prime Minister Trudeau isn't acting aggressively enough. Well, perhaps he isn't. To me, even if some of these tactics prove to be the right thing to do, it has to be part of an integrated and coherent strategy. I want not just one premier, but I want business leaders. I want union leaders. I want us to be making certain that we're taking the steps that are most likely to affect Donald Trump and the sometimes very imponderable way that he makes decisions, and to try to alter it. This idea that we're going to appeal to a bunch of voters in Michigan or Ohio, and suddenly these tariffs are going to be turned around, I'm not convinced that that's the way to go. I am convinced that we have to do it as an integrated strategy, and we should have coherence to something this important. And this just feels like a domestic political play.
Well, let's talk about that strategy then, because I did hear some mixed messages coming out of those meetings between the federal government and the premiers earlier this week. They obviously need to work together to do this. How do you think they should? Like, what's the best strategy? Because, as you mentioned, at the end of the day, you're still dealing with Donald Trump.
That's right. And so I think job number one, the prime minister's in a tough spot because he is politically weak. And so to kind of corral all of the premiers, all of the other interests in the country, that is going to be a tall order. But the first thing is he's got to move urgently. There has to be a plan put forward to the premiers and to business from the federal government. Say, listen, this is our risk assessment. This is what we think we're going to do. Now let's have an argument about it. And by the way, if people disagree, let's disagree in a room together with a closed door, not in front of the cameras where we look like we're taking a divided play into our fight with Donald Trump. I think the second thing is we have to really ask ourselves, are these tariffs avoidable? What are our goals? Are they to actually get broad-based exemptions? Are they to get exemptions for some sectors and industries and regions? Or is it to live with these tariffs and have some alternative to make them as short-lived as possible if we've determined that they're unavoidable? I think we have to have that hard conversation. And I think running off right now and filling the airwaves in the United States with millions of dollars of ads that we don't know will have any effect but might be counter-effective, I think that's a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so much to watch for on that front. I'm sure we'll see developments in the next week or so. I want to switch gears very much so and just ask you about the Canada Post strike that is happening right now with the union and Canada Post. Obviously, we're going back and forth. We heard from the union today, but there has been some attention drawn towards the fact that the federal government has not stepped in yet to kind of intervene. Do you think the Fed should be stepping in, and at what point should they be stepping in?
Here's a challenge for the federal labor minister. If you step in and shut down this negotiation, or frankly, this lack of negotiation to date, then basically you reward management. You basically say that if in fact there's going to be a labor disagreement, then we'll just come in and legislate the workers back. And, in order to offset that, the federal government would have to legislate terms so generous to workers that, again, I think that sort of screws up the whole play. So that's the challenge they're working against. But here's the cold, harsh, and I mean cold because it's December and we've got a weather watch advisory. The cold, hard reality is that we are getting closer to Christmas. This thing has dragged on for 3-4 weeks. The minister has provided the union and the management with a long leash, and they've done nothing except wrap it around the leg of regular Canadians who want to get their checks, get their parcels, and get their presents under the Christmas tree. So I do think that we should be talking days, not weeks, before the federal government does say we're banging heads together and we're putting people back to work if you guys can't come to terms on your own. I would give them a short deadline, and I would enforce that deadline, and I would scare the living hell out of them. And if they don't adhere to that, then put them back to work.
Yeah, a tricky line to walk for sure. Okay, that is CTV political commentator Scott Reid. Thanks so much for joining us and discussing so many different issues. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lindsay. Have a great day.
You too.